Hello, hello, everybody. Hello, Marnie. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. Hello, friends. I'm going to introduce first Marnie Grundman. Marnie Grundman is the author of Missing, a true story of a childhood lost. She is a runaway homeless youth advocate, certified trauma therapist specializing in the care of adult survivors of narcissistic child abuse and narcissistic family systems. She's also as mentioned, an author and an artist and an activist. Once a homeless 13-year-old, Marnie transformed her life to become an author, activist, and founder of the nonprofit organization Love Marnie and sought-after speaker. Marnie began running away from home at the age of 5 after her mother dropped her out of a two-story window, breaking both her arms. The abuse did not begin or end there. From her earliest memories, her childhood was riddled with sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. Desperate to survive and escape, Marnie became what is known as a habitual, chronic runaway. At the age of 13, Marnie disappeared and began living as a homeless youth. Her early experiences living on the streets forced her to become quite industrious. By the age of 14, Marnie secured a job as a cocktail waitress and rented her first apartment. Being so young and struggling to maintain a roof over her head while navigating the predators determined to exploit vulnerable kids, it was Marnie's mindset that allowed her to grow up quickly and become an expert at Surthrival. Marnie was always firm in the knowledge that a better life lay ahead. Not one to wait for better things to come, Marnie used her adaptive resilience skills she learned on the streets to reach out and grab that better life. She now uses her experiences as a young girl experiencing homelessness to inspire, ignite, and educate through survivor-led keynote and workshop presentations. She is also an award-winning artist whose work has been exhibited in museums, galleries, and festivals throughout US and Canada. She's been a live performing sculptor in solo exhibitions in New York, LA, Miami, Chicago, Orlando, and Montreal. And yes, Marnie, what a brave thing to be able to speak about such a past. Thank you for sharing that with everyone.
Thank you for
Now,
having me.
yeah, yeah. Now I have a few questions that I want to ask you. I don't know how to start. I'm going to start, I think, with in this context where we have overdoers, overthinking, overdoing, and having autonomy be an issue of crossing the boundary of where we might ask for help or not be able to, and such. And I'm personally always thinking as diversity being the most natural healer, because I think that if we can expand our window of tolerance for diversity, that would take care of seems most anything. So I was wondering while I was watching some of your speeches, how, I wonder, does adversity relate to diversity? How is it that it seems to me that people with adverse backgrounds, the more, adversity basically, the more the window of tolerance seems to expand somehow. Do you think that has some truth in it?
Do you mean the window of tolerance related to adversary, or that it's expanded by diversity? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Yeah,
So I just want
yeah.
to okay, so about
Yeah,
it.
I'm not sure either. I'm thinking out loud as I think this. So I'm thinking that somehow people with adverse backgrounds, such as
Yeah.
yours, and to different levels and different ways, but the more kind of adversities that one has in the background that one has survived through, the more that one becomes able to expand oneself, to embrace diversity. So nothing really seems weird after much adversity. Everything seems normal. Our norm is so expanded, it seems, that nothing really seems weird, hardly.
Yeah, but I don't know if that contributes to our resilience or our ability to heal. It certainly contributes to our ability to move through life adapting to all different types of situations and diverse backgrounds, because unfortunately and fortunately, the trauma, the adversity has taught us to be very chameleon-like. And so we're so busy, unfortunately, oftentimes adapting to our environments to our benefit, but it also has a flip side to it, in that we're not really developing who we are based on our own needs and wants and wishes, because we're living life, I say this all the time, from the outside in. I think once the healing has truly started, where you're working on your relationship with yourself because of all the things that have happened to you or been done to you, and recognizing that those things, for example, weren't your fault, and building your self-esteem and releasing yourself of that responsibility, then all of those tools that you use to survive are then superpowers. So I do agree with you in a sense. Like, you can use those same things that you learn to fit in as a tool, for example, empathy, for compassion, for being open to hearing other people and adapting your thoughts without betraying yourself in the process. So certainly there is a part of it that's really helpful, but unfortunately, without that healing work, it can also be equally as hurtful.
Yes, yes, that makes sense. So once we could maybe we could even think then that adversities are they are until I also hear you use the phrase "this too shall pass" very often, which is something I also relate very dearly to all the time, because everything does pass, and it's good to remember when it's difficult situations. So it seems to also relate with this, that the adversity, even at its worst case scenario, in the middle, in the trenches of it, that too shall pass. And so once it does, it is a superpower.
Yeah, I mean, recognizing that that doesn't have permanence, right? But your
Yes,
life does.
yes.
And what you take from that experience, even the traumatic ones, is where you find your definition and your surthrival, right? Rather than being stuck in it and hopeless. I mean, I think children come by that very naturally, because we have to find ways to survive and to keep on going in the most powerless of situations. Because for an adult who's going through something traumatic, we recognize that we do have that autonomy, right? That ability to escape, but children do not. And the children, I think, that recognize there's something better that lies ahead, or this too shall pass, are the children who fare better as adults as well.
Mhm. Beautiful. Yeah. Please tell us, for the audience, how does your experience relate to this kind of overdoing? Did you experience that? It seems like this thin line between growing up without parenting. We end up with I have to do it. I have to do it all. I have to. I must, and I will. Kind of drive that is also and has so many different levels.
Yeah.
Some of them more subtle. How do you relate to that?
I always say that we've learned to become self-reliant, but not independent.
Yes.
Right? Because we've learned that we're going to get let down, we're going to get hurt, we're going to get judged, we're going to be rejected if we reach out for help, if we try to delegate things that other people very naturally do. So rather than taking that risk, especially the rejection one, right? We're just going to do it all. And that is self-reliance right there, and learning how to become independent and recognize that if somebody doesn't show up for you, if they can't show up for you, if they do judge you, if they do reject you, this too shall pass. It's just a moment in time. So that you can learn how to become an independent person that is able to reach out and ask for help when you need it. I raised 3 children on overdoing. So I also had stepchildren for a period of time, and I was the queen of doing everything for everybody. And we also don't learn how to receive. That's the other part, right? It
That's a
doesn't
good part.
feel comfortable. It feels that, okay, you're going to do something for me, but then you're going to hurt me, because that's oftentimes, especially in narcissistic family systems, our experience. So I think it's hard to find that balance, and recognizing that doing everything and not reaching for help doesn't make you an independent person. It just makes you a very self-reliant one, and probably a really lonely one as well.
Yes, please tell us a little bit more with this, because it's such an important distinction with the self-reliance. And how do you switch over to becoming independent?
I think that for me, and for when I'm speaking to friends or clients who've been through things like this, is recognizing there's also a part in that that feels really good, right? The part where you do show up for people, and you do for people, and you give for people, and you don't ask for help because you don't want to look like you're asking for something in return. If that feels good to you to give, then why wouldn't you allow that same opportunity for the person that you're giving to? And take yourself out of that self-reliance, but rather into the intimacy of a relationship and building that vulnerability. And I know that kind of gets off the track of independence, but we're not meant to live like solo in this world, right? We're meant to be independent and in reciprocal relationships. So how I bridged that gap or started to work through that was recognizing that if I wasn't vulnerable and giving to somebody and allowing them to do the same, I wasn't actually in relationships. I was in a relationship with me, and that was it. And that wasn't very much fun. Like, that was a really lonely, isolating place to be.
Yes, avoiding relationship, and then we're cut off.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And how does this also segue into self-sabotage? Because I also hear you talk about self-sabotage, and yeah. Please tell us how is this the self-sabotage? How is it that the self-reliance is also a self-sabotage?
Because in self-reliance, you're not really taking care of yourself. You're not being as effective as you can be. You're not building relationships and community, and we can't just stand alone on our own. I mean, it's sustainable for a period of time, but eventually, life happens. And if we don't have anybody to reach out to, it's because we likely were unable to build relationships to have, something healthy to go to lean on. So in that way, we're self-sabotaging our relationships. We're not being authentic when we need something. We're not being vulnerable when we need something. And we're not allowing people to take care of us because we don't think that we deserve it. So we're not growing our sense of self-esteem through that process either. We're not growing our relationship with ourselves. We're continuing to use relationships and things as self-harm. And what happens with that? Well, relationships are very transitory, right? Because you're not sustaining them. So what happens with that? People leave me. People always leave me. Nobody sticks around. Well, that's because there wasn't a real relationship there happening. Not always, obviously, but that doubles down on the messaging we received as children, which is that people leave and they don't value us because we aren't valuable. That's pretty big self-sabotage right there.
Yep, yep. And how does this relate to being our own rescuer and not waiting for a rescue?
Yeah. that was a hard one to learn.
Yes.
I get a little teary, I do. Um, I was taught by my mother that other people were to be used to care for you. So as much as I wouldn't reach out for help, I was looking for somebody to rescue me because I didn't know that I had the capability to rescue myself. And I didn't know that I had the capability or that I was allowed to show up for myself and provide myself with care. So what did that look like? Overspending, overeating, undereating, doing things to damage myself, to live down to the expectation that my mother had told me I was worth. And so I think that, when we don't learn that we're good enough to do the very best for ourselves first, we don't show up for ourselves. We don't feel worthy. And reaching that turning point, I was going through and I was doing all sorts of stuff for raising funds for homelessness. And I was on the verge of eviction, literally.
Yeah.
And my best friend said to me, she goes, when are you going to give to yourself what you give to other people? Don't you deserve to show up for yourself? And it was one of those moments of, oh my gosh, my mother taught me that I wasn't capable and that somebody's supposed to come by and rescue me. And I'd been waiting for it, but I wouldn't let them, even if they came by, right?
Yeah, double bind.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it seems that being in the middle of helping homeless and being at the verge of eviction, it's such a awesome, beautiful life teaching also. By going through, how did you end up with that? How did you come out of eviction? How did you turn it around?
Well, I started to give to myself as much as I was giving to the organizations and putting it into balance. I was doing a lot of things, and a lot of people don't even know this was going on, right? Because it was so behind the scenes. But I was spending so much time focusing on making money for these organizations, one in particular that I love so much. It's not their fault. I did this because I wanted to help kids like me. It was like I was rescuing myself while I was throwing myself off the building into the fire at the same time, and deciding to take a step back and not throw away something that gave me so much purpose and so much love, but rather bringing it into balance with, okay, I can put so many hours here and I have to put so many hours here because I need to make sure that I'm feeding myself. It's that thing on the airplane, you put the mask on the child first. So I was putting the mask on little Marnie first for a change so that I could rescue big Marnie.
What time frame was this for you? How old were you?
When I was doing I still raise money for homelessness, but
Yes, yes, I
but
want
I'm
to
not
get
going
to
to the
that.
big
Yes.
anymore. I started doing that about around the time I wrote my book, so it would have been about 12 years ago was when I began. And the first 2 years of it that I was doing that, I was really struggling to keep my head above water. I was spending so many hours doing things to raise funds and raise awareness and not get paid for it because I didn't feel like I had the value to, and all of these different things. And it was really that moment, that best friend moment. This is why we need to be our own best friend as well, where she's like, what are you doing? That's so it's not that long ago, even it's 12 years ago. And I look back at that, it's crazy how much we can grow in such a brief period of time. And how I look back at that, I would never do that to myself again in any universe. And it really changed my life a lot because it made me recognize to always ask myself the question, okay, if I do this, where does my life stand in this? Am I prioritizing my needs first? And really doing that check-in and being very aware of keeping my life not just together, but growing.
Beautiful. Please tell us about this organization. You are helping the homeless. We didn't really go through your story or what you actually do. Let's now turn around and please let's do that because some people in the audience might not be familiar with your work. So please tell us a little bit about your story. And what you do in your life today. How do you have this organization helping homeless and runaway kids?
Yeah.
Please. Mm-hmm.
So I've been, for the people who don't know, well, from the introduction, I did live on the streets as a 13-year-old, and at age 14 and a half, I got my first job as a cocktail waitress of all things, and I pulled myself off of the streets. And I was still incredibly vulnerable, still being victimized, but at least now, like, I had a roof over my head a majority of the time. And when I finally decided to come out and talk about my story, and it took me decades, I was deeply ashamed of the fact that I had lived on the streets as a child. I carried so much with me. And when I finally began sharing my story, I recognized that people really didn't, by and large, understand how kids end up on the streets, that there's still this stigma of, oh, they just want to go and have fun and, things like that. So I got affiliated with an organization called Covenant House, which is the largest, oldest homeless youth organization in North, South, and Latin America. And I began doing some work with them, mostly fundraising to help them not just keep their doors open, but doing awareness work. And as that was going on, I was connecting to other people in the field. And this one girl, Christmas was coming around and we're talking, and she'd been homeless at the same age, but she's like 20 years younger than me. And in comparing notes, we shared a lot of the same experiences decades apart. And Christmas is rolling around. And because we were kids who ran away from home from abuse, we both had no family. And we were both talking about how we deal with the holidays, which is basically to turn everything off, pretend it's not happening, and make sure we don't watch a Christmas special or any sort of thing that's going to make us be reminded of what we don't have. And we decided that we needed to do something different, that wasn't the way to go. And we formed an organization called Love Marnie. It's not as active anymore because I'm traveling now because I'm prioritizing myself. But every Christmas day we would put together, the last time was 100 backpacks, all brand new, with all brand new supplies in them, things I wish I had had when I was living on the streets, a street team. And we go out and we connect to people who are living on the streets that likely will never even cross the doors of a shelter or any organization, because there's a lot of population that won't seek services for a variety of reasons. For me, it was fear. I would have never received any sort of help. I would have ran from it because I was a runaway living underground, right? So that's what we do as an organization. And hopefully I'll have something going on this coming Christmas as well. And for us as former street kids who had no family, it created a family experience for us. And it took something overcoming that adversity, right, to put us in a very diverse situation with all different kinds of people and different people volunteering for different reasons of their own, and really brought us all together in these beautiful life-changing experiences that really, I think, help the people who are on the streets to know that they're still valued, that they're human beings and we care about them, and the people who are connecting with them to understand that we're all one step away from that possibility, and that they're human beings that deserve our time and compassion as well.
And even how I love how you say even a smile can change that person's day, because more often than not, we're not even looking in their direction because we see a mirror image that we don't want to even consider. However, it is very human and it can happen to any of us also, even as an adult, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to ask you about many times it seems in some sort of abusive situation, let's call it, or maybe neglect or whatever it may be, that we have this inner voice saying, oh, I don't have it so bad, so and so, but people have it so much worse than me, I'm fine, I need to be more grateful, and this kind of overriding, because we are children and it is our parents, so it's easier, we want to have them be the mothers and fathers that ideally they could be. And of course, they're coming from their backgrounds, having received the same. So, yeah, and certainly in my case as well, I left my home when I was 13 as well. And although I thought I was just too wild and they couldn't retain me, and and that was and I was lucky enough that I didn't end up on the streets. I stayed with my sister and then had a boyfriend, but of course went through lots of adversity nevertheless. 13 years old, when I look now at 13-year-old, I mean, I thought I was grown up. I thought I was like done with family, but but the storyline was that I'm the one who's at fault. I'm the one who's too wild. Nobody can, I'm too much. They don't want me. Of course, nobody would. And then, and then, yeah, we end up comparing, saying, I didn't have anything bad. I was in my late 20s, even early 30s, when I still had the same story that, my parents were the best. I grew up so in such a privileged, and I did grow up very privileged in many ways. Yet emotionally, I mean, when it comes down to the measure is love, right? Love is what we actually need. And if it's not there, it's just a matter of degree, right? So how would you say for people, and I imagine for many of us in the audience, that it's overdoing and over self-relying, this kind of thing that they may have, that they think, oh, it was just fine. I was privileged. I didn't have it bad. Those people on the streets, they have it bad. They don't have a home, right? What would you say for homeless-minded people?
Well, not just homeless-minded people. I feel like it's a bigger thing. I mean, there's several things here. One, the abuse is normalized because it's our normal, because we have nothing to compare it to. And if we do speak up in some way, or it looks like we're going to, what do the abusers do? They leverage statements like that. You don't know how bad I had it. You don't know how bad this kid has it. This one's starving over here. So that comparison is also being taught to us so that we don't question what's being done to us, right? And I came up in a financially privileged background, and those children are the ones that are going to be overlooked more times than not, because they look spoiled and ungrateful when they're running away. And their parents are painting a picture, and a lack of education, and all these different things that are going on that make a perfect storm for that child to continue on in this idea that they were the problem instead of the system being the problem. And as adults, until we gain contrast in other relationships and experiences, sometimes we don't figure it out, because that's our conditioning. And the fact of the matter is that children, by and large, do not leave a home where they feel safe and secure and loved. They just don't. Children don't act out, in a vacuum for no reason. Children, a lot of times, the ones who are acting out the loudest are the biggest scapegoats in the family, for example. And so what I would say to somebody who is looking at themselves as, I was the problem, they were fine, and they were great parents, there's a couple of things I would say. One, the question I would ask you is, how much of your childhood do you actually remember, and what was your experience? That's the first question you need to ask yourself, because if you don't have a lot of memories, chances are there weren't a lot of good memories in there. And the next thing I would ask you is, would you at any point in time treat a child in the way that your parents treated you? Would you blame them for going off on their own at the age of 13? Would you think that that's a healthy and okay thing to do? What would you think if you saw some other little girl out there? Would you think that that child is the problem? And I think when we start to reframe it that way, we start to recognize, okay, wait a minute. I was 13. Where was the guidance and the security and the love? I was 11. Where was the guidance and the security and the love? Where was the person looking beneath the surface? Because it can't be the child's fault. They didn't teach themselves that that's how you cope. They learned that somehow.
Yes. And now, as adults, that we are overriding our needs and, you know, walking into hypervigilance and burnout. So there's got to be something that went wire somewhere. Is that right? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So where do we start looking? If I'm in the middle of hypervigilance, I'm constantly trying to control and manipulate circumstance so that I can hopefully fix it and make it safe. And yes, what is
I
it that
think
I'm doing? Where can I stop?
I think the first thing that we start looking at is recognizing that that's actually our brain breathing and blinking. That's an autonomic response that we've learned through the rewiring of our system. You know, the book, The Body Keeps the Score, right? That's our body taking over because something is alerting us that something isn't quite right. And your body never lies to you. So I think the first step in that, when you see those behaviors coming out, is stopping. If you can't do anything else, if you could just stand still for a second and be in the feeling and trust that it's there to keep you safe, that's going to kick in that part of your brain that you need to have you stop taking those overactive actions or use them in your favor instead of against you. And if you succumb to that moment, like for example, you freeze or you fawn and you don't say what you wish you had said, or you don't create that boundary, if you have that moment where you're not able to show up that way, and this is so important, be kind to yourself and say, you know what, next time I'll do better. That was me not understanding how to keep myself safe, and that's okay. Because now I'm going to take a lesson from that and I'm going to build on it instead of going, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And I should have done this and I should have done that, because those are the voices that we're used to. We're used to not being our own best friend. We're used to being our worst enemy. That's that conditioning. And so to flip that around, learning how to break the cycle of it, break the circle, stop it. You start to speak to yourself poorly and judge yourself, stop it and just go, okay, wait a minute. I had a feeling. I wasn't able to identify it. Where am I now so that I can do better next time? This too shall pass and tomorrow's another day, right?
Yes. And so this brings me to our solution in this context. And for me, it's a core natural state of being that is play mind. How do you relate to play mind? I see that you're a live performing sculptor.
Yeah.
Tell us about art. Tell us about your art. When did you start making and showing your art? Does this relate to play mind for you?
I think so. I think because, you know, one of the ways that we heal ourselves is through expression. And what is a great way of expression? Art. And that could be music, could be visual, it could be body movement, dancing, sculpture, you know, whatever it is that thing that you identify with. For me as a child, art and reading and books, music, those were big escapes for me. And they were things that I felt I did well. And that wasn't something I had a lot of. So it was a really natural turnabout of events for me to find myself as a visual artist while trying to become a nurse, which is another story. But I quit school to pursue art because I started sculpting in a class and I felt like that's where I belonged. And being able to express myself that way and take my emotions and share them in that very safe way has been a big part of my healing journey. Writing was a lot scarier. It isn't now, but it was for a long time. And even if you're never going to show the art, even if you're never going to share it, what it does in terms of calming your soul and your mind and healing your brain is fantastic. And I always encourage people to find that thing that brings you that peace. And so, yeah, for me, it's art and creating art live. And actually, one of my daughters used to be part of the show. So that was a neat bonding experience as well.
What kind of experience was it? It's how do you mean live performance sculpting? You're sculpting in front of an audience, is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so either I'm creating a sculpture live that's been based on something I was hired to do, or I'm doing body casting live. So I would have my daughter and I would be body casting. She had a bodysuit on, just so everyone knows, but I would be body casting over her and then airbrushing it and putting it into a sculpture as well. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you still do it?
Not as much because I'm traveling now. So this is I decided that I wanted to explore the world and I work online. And so I took a really bold move and I put my things in storage in October. And I'm currently in Marbella, Spain.
Wow. Awesome. Awesome. Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful. And you see clients online.
I see clients
Yes.
online, yes.
And how do you work with them?
I work on we work on Zoom and I work using talk therapy, and I'm also an EMDR practitioner. And my practice is based around the processing of trauma and working through developing the tools that you need to be able to cope with the trauma that you've been through and not have it define who you are. So I'm very focused on helping people be able to stand on their own 2 feet without negating what their experiences were that got them in the place where they need that help in the first place.
Mhm. And so you're basically working with trauma, and is there a specific kind of clients that you end up with?
Yes,
Yes.
all of my clients are survivors of narcissistic family systems and narcissistic abuse at the hands of at least one parent. They're in different phases and stages in their relationships. Some have relationships, some are low contact, some are no contact. Wherever they are is where I meet them. That type of abuse is highly emotional, and it's very cult-like. So it often involves the whole system of adults and one or two scapegoat children within the family who carry the brunt of all of the damage in terms of not developing a sense of self that's accurate, for example, or being parented in a way that grows their knowledge of being worthy, to receive love and things like that. So it's a lot different than just childhood trauma. It's methodical, it's layered, it happens at the beginning of a child's life, and it continues on as long as they're within those relationships.
Yes, and it seems that narcissism is kind of the disease of our current culture. I I don't escape from it. I don't see anybody really escaping from it. And then there's the more extreme cases here. Can you tell us a little bit more about how is it that it begins in the beginning of the child's life? How early and how does it show up?
Well, the problem when you're dealing with a parent who's narcissistic, and I never say a parent who has narcissistic personality disorder because there is, a continuum of that. One, two, I'm not a diagnostician and I don't know the parent to be able to say that for fact, right? So I'm basing this on the patterns of abusive behaviors or behaviors in general and how it begins at the beginning of a child's life. A parent who is having a child where that parent doesn't have the ability to connect through empathy, where that parent is an extremely emotionally immature individually, doesn't have the ability or the desire to prioritize that child's needs. And they operate in the world through control. And what is the easiest person to control? A newborn baby and on up. So oftentimes those children, their emotional needs are unmet to begin with. And by doing so, you're teaching a child that they're not worthy of the basic of nurturing. They might go through the function of feeding and caring in that regard, but emotionally they're disconnected from that child, or they're overly connected. It's one extreme or the other. When that child hits an age where they're starting to develop as an individual person, that's when the abuse becomes more apparent. that parent will that might be that parent's golden child, particularly if it's a child of the opposite sex, who's less of a threat to them. So that child can do no wrong. They could be crashing cars and burning down buildings and robbing banks, but they can do no wrong, right? And then there's the scapegoat child who's likely keeping their head down, going to school, getting good grades, and they're the bad child. And the other child is also being used as a weapon. They're being used against each other, but there's a lot of triangulation. There's a lot of emotional responsibility for the parents' emotions, and the children aren't allowed to have any. So they don't learn how to develop. They don't learn how to identify their own emotions. What do? Now they're hypervigilant. They're operating in the world from the outside in. So all of this starts at the very beginning of a child's life. And when you're dealing with somebody who's truly narcissistic, it never stops, even in those adult relationships, unfortunately, and it's never isolated. So in other words, you have a narcissistic parent over here, well, somewhere in the rest of the family, there's another one, because it runs through generations, and it also is a family dynamic, like a cult.
Yeah. And it starts with already objectifying everything, right? So now you're objectifying the baby. You're really, yes. And it bleeds into so many different areas of life everywhere. This narcissism, I mean, it's like it's almost impossible not to be so self-conscious and so self-involved in this way. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and on the one side, I look at social media and it's such a great tool for so many things, right? And on
yes,
the other side, we're exploiting children right, left, and center. And we're watching actual narcissistic parents abuse their children through using them as a means to gain attention and finance. And we don't have the laws around it yet to catch up to keep those children safe. So, narcissistic personality disorder, if we're going to talk about it, is that it's created through different ways too, right? It's not just a parent to a child abusing that child. It's also, I'm sure, going to happen through these platforms of these children not ever developing a sense of self. So they may not be being neglected in that way that we know neglect to look like, but they're being neglected in another way because their value is being based on how many likes they get and how people adore them. And again, it goes outside in. Or if you look at war, for example, that creates a lot of children who also end up with that disorder through, loss and trauma that had nothing to do with child abuse from parent to child. And so I think it's important that we look at it as being something that's created not just in one way, so that if we do have a parent who's out there looking for help, who has a child who might be exhibiting some signs of moving in that direction, because maybe their spouse who they're no longer married to is a narcissist, for example, and you've got the parent over here trying to pull a rescue of sorts. We need to be aware enough to not just judge just like that, and to actually listen and assess and do the best we can to keep doors open so that when people walk through them looking for help, we're not shaming them.
yeah. And how do we recognize in ourselves that as an adult, we haven't had a healthy self to begin with? And maybe we're even trying to negate the self going forward into spiritual realms when we didn't even have a self to begin with, which is completely impossible to, if you don't even have a self healthy enough, then going into spiritual realms and trying to negate that self becomes really dangerous.
Yeah, and
What
a
would you?
lot of those, and the other like quick fix kind of things, like, I love mindset. I mean, I say things like
Yes,
this too shall pass, and I do believe in it, and it has a place in time, but not until after you've worked on the hard work and the trauma and unraveling it and your feelings around it. And I think that, going into, for me personally, and I don't want to negate anybody else's experience, but when you're looking for, I was born to make other people better kind of stuff, or you're looking for, oh, rewrite your own history. What you're really looking for in that moment is a Band-Aid because you really want to feel better. And I can promise you that's not a good Band-Aid to go into until after you've done the other work. And then you're strong enough to assess whether or not that's a healthy, modality, for lack of a better word, to attach to. I end up with clients from both of those areas, so I have feelings about it because I do see that oftentimes they're quite hurt by that.
Yes, yes. Yes, exactly. It comes up in the workaholic, work martyr area too, especially if it's gone far enough from workaholic to work martyrdom. It becomes like, I'm so self-sacrificing, I'm doing the right thing, I'm good for that, I'm a good person, or, I'm helpful in all of this. And while you're burning the candle on both ends and burning out eventually, right?
Implode. Well, it's not sustainable. And so what also happens in that, I'm not as good as I thought I was. And so now you've just added a layer of trauma, which is not your fault, to the trauma pile, without recognizing that that was what was going to happen. But, any extreme is not sustainable.
Yes. Well, what would you like to say to close for our friends, for us? I have so much more I would like to hear. We didn't get to hear your personal story, but I know that you have a beautiful TED Talk and you have beautiful interviews out there. And how would you like the audience to follow up with you? What can we do in relation to Love Marnie, helping the homeless? And
Well, actually, I mean, if you want to help the homeless, people experiencing homelessness, if you go on my website, which is marniespeaks.com, there are some resources on there. And really, my bigger baby, even though I didn't found it, is Covenant House. And the reason for that is because when they take the children in who have been experiencing homelessness, they give them a family. It's a family environment where they have the opportunities to go to counseling, to get medical care, career training. They go to high school on site. Like, it is truly like living in a family that oftentimes these children have never had. And so they are my organization of choice at this point.
please tell us one more time the name.
Covenant House.
Heaven in House?
Covenant, Covenant, House, HOUSE, and it's .org. And there's probably one in your city because I think there's about 50 of them at this point, main houses. They also help kids who have been through human trafficking. They have separate facilities for them. It's an incredible organization, and I've been involved with them for over 12 years. So, that's always my first place that I want people to help. And as far as what I would say to people out there, just in a general way, and it's not to take anything away from myself by saying that I'm not special, but I'm not special in terms of having the ability to heal. I'm no different than anybody else. I think that we all have the ability to heal, to do better for ourselves, and we all deserve not just love from others, but we really deserve to have a good relationship with ourselves and to love ourselves. So if I can do it, anybody else can too.
Yes, beautiful.
Thank you.
Not being special is the most special way to be, is it not? Yes. Yes, once we can get over that hurdle of having to be special,
Yeah.
that's a really good one. And please tell us also that you have a free gift. Is that right?
I didn't have a free gift.
You
Sorry.
didn't have a free gift? Okay. Well,
No,
you
I
have
put it on the website.
Yes,
Sorry.
it's on your website. Not a problem at all because you have it on your website and that will work. That will work just fine. Yes, yes.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
Nothing to be sorry. Nothing to be sorry. It's a time to get and a time to give. And there are many things that you offer for free that is fully available. And we're going to make those easy to find as well on your page. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Marnie. Thank you so much for your time, for your courage, and for doing what you do and not doing what you do as well, your travels. I wish you wonderful travels.
Thank
And
you very
yes,
much. I appreciate you
thank
having
you.
me on. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Tara.
you. Thank you, everyone. Take care.